Chapter 13. All Lives Stop. A pause in action without stopping production. Regarding the calendar, scheduling was the only real downside to summer school. Smaller sized classrooms meant students could better focus on their subjects, which allowed kids to achieve higher marks than normal. It was a positive experience despite landing smack in the middle of summer break. Jerry Miller himself, after a mere 30 days off, knew the value of rest, taking a break, better than perhaps anyone could by the time he returned to his classroom. His vacation, such as it was, had been a mixture of needless worrying and, in all likelihood avoidable, hostility. Still wearing his eye patch, Jerry arrived at school early to prepare his class. There wasn't much to it. He only needed to organize the textbooks he was required to hand out and to write his full name on the board. In the meantime, he would wait for the students to show up so he could begin reteaching them what they couldn't seem to grasp during the regular school year. It was exciting to Jerry. There were 8 kids in his classroom that day as opposed to the normal 20 plus. They would study for 2 hours straight instead of the standard yet rushed 45-minute sessions. Those 2 points alone were enough for Jerry to know they would each walk away with passing grades. He already knew that no matter how upset his class may be upon their arrival, they'd leave there in 3 weeks with smiles on their faces, a sense of pride, and tools for success in the fall when the next semester began officially. Yes, he thought to himself, knowledge is power, particularly knowledge of the future. Jerry could see it clear in his mind. He knew the outcome already. He thought about how that knowledge could guide his lessons in the face of the students' resistance to learning. Jerry thought about this as he erased another teacher's notes from the board so that he could introduce himself. He had a golden path forward, a direct line from pissed off student missing out on summer vacation directly to bright, shining minds with a sense of self-worth. Jerry stopped erasing the board when suddenly his students began to arrive. He turned to address the sullen faces as they entered the class one by one. "Good morning," Jerry said. "Take any seat you want. We don't have assigned desks for the next few weeks. Wherever you want to sit is fine." He did not receive one single reply and sensed he had his work cut out for him. Turning back to the board to write his name for his students, Jerry stopped in a brief moment of astonishment and stared at the board. There, in front of him, was a large-sized lazy 8, the symbol for infinity. Jerry stepped back and looked at it, wondering if he'd created the symbol accidentally while erasing or in some way on purpose. Had he somehow subconsciously created that shape on the board? Or was this his way of realizing he'd always used erasers in a looping pattern? Jerry wondered to himself, standing expressionless in front of the board while his class filled up. The students sat waiting, growing impatient by the second. "Yo, Killer Miller," one of them said. "Do we get like books or whatever?" Jerry turned to address the student when another spoke up first. "Nice patch," they said. "What happened to your eye, Killer?" Distracted by their banter, Jerry forgot the board and instead introduced himself out loud while handing out the textbooks. "The name is Mr. Miller," he corrected them. "And yes, I lost my eye and replaced it with a death ray laser that could harm anyone I look at, so I need to keep it covered with this patch for your personal safety." "Really?" one student asked. "No," Jerry answered while the rest of the classroom laughed. "There was a minor accident. I'll be fine. I only have to wear this stupid thing for the rest of the week." "It looks cool, dude," one student said. "It goes with your whole vibe, Killer," said another. "You look like a secret agent from a comic book or something." After handing out the books, Jerry returned to the front of the class and sat on the edge of his desk to face them. "Okay," he said, "about that nickname." Jerry hesitated, thinking again about the golden path and his knowledge of the student's future, the inevitable outcome, and how he could use that knowledge to gain the upper hand. Then he said, I'll allow it, but only inside of this classroom. Then it's over." The students murmured in dismay, and Jerry added, "But I'm not going to be the only one. We all get nicknames." Jerry pointed to the student who had questioned whether he actually lost his eye and said, "You're going to be Laser for the rest of the summer." The students laughed, showing their approval, and began giving themselves nicknames. After that, Jerry had them open the textbooks and he began the lesson plan. He forgot all about the chalkboard behind him and the shape he'd, more likely than not, created absent-mindedly. Jerry was done with potential routes and dwelling on things needlessly. He wouldn't stand in one place fixated on problems he had no control over, while other problems manifested. He'd learned his own lesson, and finally, in all the ways imaginable, Jerry Miller was wide awake. The world, it seemed, was filled with second chances. The end. Epilogue. Crocodile larva. At the outset of deployment, whatever traces of fear or anxiety had festered in the minds of the soldiers was soon overridden by a collective thirst for blood. The enemy was plentiful, so there was enough to go around, and every single one of the 40,000 member strong army would have a taste of the inevitable triumph. For at the end of the day, nothing was more gratifying than personal victory and the opportunity to prove one's quality. But the event began with an organized group effort. The battle proceeded from the base of the trunk upward against descending streams of moisture from the recent rain, which flickered in the evening's fading light. The strategy was to surprise the enemy under cover of darkness, locate them where they slept, and devour them whole, swarming their ranks until there was nothing left. "No quarter," was the final command before the action had started. Flanking each side of the tree, the majority of the army raced at top speed, while an elite force made haste up the center in a straight line. At times, soldiers crawled over one another with sheer enthusiasm for a kill. Other times, they would create a wall of living, moving bodies twisting around the perimeter to ensure none escaped the onslaught. Finally, after a steady climb, at the thinnest part of the foliage, the first of many opponents were spotted, supposedly keeping watch, though derelict in their duty as they fed like pigs on the underside of leaves. Their bodies bloated from their feast. It was all too easy for them to be killed instantly when the soldiers had ascended their stations of complacency. The first strike, though gaining few in body count, was swift and efficient. No trace of the enemy was left, save the damaged limbs they'd infested for so many weeks. Whether the rest of their comrades knew it yet or not, the newly captured territory they'd so blatantly invaded was no longer theirs to devastate. There was still hope for an economic recovery of sorts, a chance for the agriculture to come back at least, but what mattered most was that the infestation of evil, as it had been dubbed in early forms of propaganda, ended there and then. And so what had begun as a formal assault was at that point absolute war, once the bulk of the tree had been breached. Any actual communicative language turned to animalistic grunts and growls as the battle ensued. Arms and legs were used to pin the enemy down, and teeth became weapons. Warm blood splashed across their faces. The desperate screams of their victims filled the air, and the sense of dominance created a feverish, if not wild, confidence. Though their training had not been wasted up to that point, the constraints put on a soldier to retain a sense of moral decency even in times of war had vanished completely as they slurped down intestines and entrails alike. The time of death's black doom had arrived. Fortunately, what would henceforth be known as Operation Aphid Massacre, though righteous, was short-lived. By dawn's light, the sounds of war had fallen away to quiet, sensible calm on each and every branch. The annals of history would be recorded in brief text, stating victory without casualty on the side of the just, save one observing officer. Nothing would be written of the madness that had rose up in the minds of the soldiers as they preyed on the opposition, which had temporarily occupied the battleground tree. Final passages referred only to the end of the imperialistic notions and the resulting military establishments that took their place. A combination of up to 50 bases of operations and outposts were built to protect enemies' return. In time, new families would be raised and communities would thrive amongst healthy regrowth. Taking flight, trace amounts of soldiers relocated throughout the region. Some remained in service to command, even achieving merit-based promotions. Others still shook off their medals in preference for mercenary life abroad, in hopes of vanquishing new atrocities and thriving in subsequent victories, no matter how unsanctioned. As all wars have proven, violence and death, albeit necessary, lead to certain peace times. In theory, peace brings an end to violence and death. Only time would tell, and, thanks to the ladybugs, time was the one thing the world had plenty of.